One of the world's oldest airlines, flying the world's longest routes, a brand known across the globe, but less than a decade ago, it was hemorrhaging cash, spiralling toward collapse. It's been transformed.
I'm David Tweed. This is Bloomberg Turnaround. Join me to see how Alan Joyce got Qantas flying high again.
Qantas turnaround is really a textbook example of what can be done within the airline industry.
In 2018, Qantas reported a profit of $1.2 billion, its largest ever. Shareholders were rewarded with share buybacks and dividends of more than $360 million, while employees were showered with $50 million of bonuses. That was a far cry from the $2.7 billion loss announced in 2014.
There's no doubt that today's numbers are confronting, but they represent the year that is past, and we have now come through the worst.
Hey David.
How do you do?
Nice to meet you. How are you?
Tweed.
Nice to meet you, David.
Glad to be here.
And welcome to Qantas head office.
Thank you very much. So tell me about that turnaround. What were the main elements of the turnaround? How did that plan evolve?
So we had probably the perfect storm hitting us then around 2013. So the conditions, I suppose, are important because we had high oil prices. They reached well over $4 billion, the highest over $100 a barrel, the highest that we've seen. We had simultaneously a domestic competitor, Virgin, running at us and trying to take massive market share and being funded by a number of foreign airlines, extensively funded. And we also had, because of the very high Aussie dollar, a lot of international carriers flying into Australia. So it was the perfect storm on all of our businesses simultaneously.
Joyce announced a $2 billion cost-cutting program. Everything from faster aircraft turnarounds to saving fuel from optimizing routes. The workforce shrank by 5,000 or 15%. The fleet was simplified. Boeing 747s were retired ahead of schedule, replaced by A330-200s. An order for 8 A380s was deferred, and schedules were changed to maximize the use of Qantas's remaining 12 A380s. Qantas dropped unprofitable routes like Perth to Singapore. On other routes, planes were changed to match capacity to demand. Joyce himself took a 36% pay cut. It was one of the most remarkable aviation turnarounds in history. In 2020, Qantas will mark its 100th year. To get a sense of that history, I went to the Qantas Heritage Collection at Sydney's domestic airport. It's just near Gate 13 in Terminal 3. You can go there while waiting for a flight. So, these were the two visionaries, 1919. Who were they?
These are the founders of Qantas. This is Hudson Fysh and this is Paul McGuinness.
The airline was born in 1920, founded by two veterans of Gallipoli, the disastrous World War I campaign, often regarded as the crucible of the Australian nation. Hudson Fysh and Paul McGuinness established the Queensland and Northern Territory aerial services to provide air transport over the huge distances of Australia's north. But even then they had international ambitions. Just before World War II, Qantas moved from its headquarters in Queensland to Sydney.
And when they actually moved down from Brisbane to Sydney in 1938, they packed up the entire contents of Qantas's head office in 2 flying boats and flew them down in 1 weekend.
And where was the runway?
The runway was actually at Rose Bay, which is on Sydney Harbour. So Sydney's first international airport is actually not here at Mascot, it's actually on Sydney Harbour.
This is Rose Bay, where Qantas had its first international airstrip. It's still used as a terminal, and the boat planes would take off from here on the long journey to Singapore.
The great hulking flying boats would slowly, steadily gather speed, faster and faster, until their 32-metre wings lifted them out of the water like huge, graceful waterbirds soaring into the blue yonder. During the decades after the war, Qantas established itself as Australia's premier carrier. Embedding itself into the national psyche.
By the early 2000s, Qantas's domestic rival Ansett had collapsed and a new entrant came into the market in the form of Virgin Blue. Qantas decided to establish its own cut-price airline, Jetstar, and a young Irishman named Alan Joyce was chosen as CEO.
At Jetstar, Joyce managed to create what was probably the first successful cut-price airline subsidiary of a full-service parent. He chose a headquarters near Melbourne, far from the Qantas headquarters in Sydney, and proved himself an able negotiator.
One of the reasons that the low-cost subsidiaries never worked anywhere else in the world, apart from the fact that all the clever consultancies said they wouldn't, was that there was always massive conflict in terms of cannibalisation, self-cannibalisation of the product of the mainstream carrier. And that was where it required more than just the ability to set up a low-cost carrier, but also to negotiate all the different issues of network, of pricing, and to fight your way through probably your biggest enemy, which was your parent in many ways.
Success at Jetstar opened the door to another chief executive role, the flying kangaroo itself. But Joyce was soon under attack from all sides. Still ahead, we talk to Alan Joyce about the most controversial event of his career, the decision to ground the airline.
It's not a popularity contest. And if you think doing the CEO job is a popularity contest, you should be doing it.
At the dawn of the 21st century, the flying kangaroo was an essential link for Australia and the rest of the world. But as the century progressed, Qantas was buffeted by international competition and unrest at home.
We have decided to ground the Qantas international and domestic fleets immediately. I repeat, we are grounding the Qantas fleet now. There will be no further Qantas domestic or international departures anywhere in the world.
Alan Joyce was appointed Chief Executive of Qantas in 2008. Just as the Australian dollar started to climb, attracting international competition, the oil price started to increase, and some of Qantas's dozen or so unions began industrial action.
It was a difficult time, obviously, after we were coming out of the global recession, and all airlines were doing pretty badly. The airline business, of course, is riddled with unions. I think Qantas at the time had about 15 or 18 of them. And each of them has quite a considerable amount of power, because if you can easily ground an airline by withholding your services, which is a massive impact.
Joyce took his own drastic action. He closed down the airline.
The reaction was harsh. The consequences reverberated nationwide.
The government overall was concerned about the extreme action taken by Qantas that had stranded tens of thousands of passengers far away from home.
Having the balls to do it was really a massive thing at the time. It sort of fades into history now, but I think had he not done that, had Alan not done that at the time, Qantas would be very much a pale picture of what it is today.
Alan, I want to go right back to probably the most controversial thing of your career, which was the lockout.
Yeah.
Why was it necessary?
Well, you probably were aware that we had gone through a dispute for nearly a year with three workforce groups who were acting in unison with each other. We started to lose a lot of money because we were unreliable, because there was a lot of action happening, and we started losing 20 million a week. We could have given in to the demands, and this was in 2011, and we believe that those demands would have restricted Qantas to failure in the future and wouldn't have allowed Qantas subsequently to do the turnaround in 2013.
After the lockout, the Workplace Relations Tribunal cancelled industrial action on both sides. Now the unions would have to resolve their grievances by arbitration. It meant that Qantas could get back to work. In 2012, Qantas signed a partnership with Emirates, allowing it to deliver passengers to Dubai from where they could plug into dozens of routes into Europe.
It gave Qantas access to all of the routes beyond Dubai that Emirates operated, which was a massive contrast to what Qantas had. They had basically London, I think, and Frankfurt at that stage.
Just as the Emirates deal was settling in, Virgin Australia launched its brutal price war. Facing these pressures, Joyce announced his transformation program to a chorus of public criticism.
You became one of the most vilified chief executives in Australia. You had people calling for your resignation. There were television polls. No one, it seemed, was supporting you except for the board. How did you keep the board on the side?
I remember that poll. I was on a TV program, Sunrise, and they said, I think, I've probably forgotten the stats now, but they said he just in a poll before I came on, I was announcing the turnaround plan, what we were doing to improve it, and they said 98% or in the high 90s of people want you to resign. And my answer there was, well, it's not a popularity contest. And if you think doing the CEO job is a popularity contest, you shouldn't be doing it. I'm here to work for the board and for the shareholders, and they're fully supporting me.
But how did you get the support of the staff?
So we figured that some of the principles around the transformation were, it just couldn't be a focus on financial outcomes. It actually had to have two other things going at the same time. It had to deliver great customer outcomes, and we couldn't take anything from the customer, and it had to engage our people. And probably another stakeholder, because of the iconic brand that we are, was the general public. So we spent a lot of time on managing, communicating and talking to all the stakeholders to bring them together.
That said though, personally, how did you take it? I mean, did you sleep?
Yeah, actually quite good. One of the things, I worked in Aer Lingus, was my first aviation job, and one of the things that they trained our management in was mindfulness, which is a big thing these days as well, and allowing people to focus. And when you got home, my partner Shane, he wanted to talk about what was in the press, what was occurring. As you can imagine, he was reading it, and I didn't, because then I'm at home, I'm going to switch off, I'm going to block that out, and that helped me get through that period of time.
Where does that come from? I mean, one, you must have a extreme sense of self-belief. Where does that sense of self-belief come from?
So I think my parents have always been my role models. So my mother, she's only 4'9". She's an Irish mother, as you can imagine, and she's like, one of my brothers calls her the best pound for pound fighter in probably Dublin, because she really has always stood up for the family, to bullies, and she was a determined individual, still is. So I always got that sense of purpose from them. And neither of my parents finished secondary education. I was actually the first in the family, in our history of our family, to finish secondary, let alone tertiary education.
A lot of people watching us talk right now are wondering what lessons they can take away from what happened during the Qantas turnaround.
I would say that you develop a plan, you get as much diversity and collaboration together. So around our senior leadership table, I've got 4 females, there are 3 gay men. So we've got a very diverse group, but I think it's diversity of thinking in many different forms. And I think we're very passionate about all forms of diversity. We're one of the leaders on the marriage equality debate here in Australia, and given the amount of LGBTI customers we have, employees that we have and shareholders that we have, we thought it was a very important campaign for us to take a lead on. It's been 6 months since I've been here to announce the...
Joyce's outspoken support for same-sex marriage earned him an embarrassing encounter in Perth. An anti-gay marriage activist pushed a pie into his face.
So at the time it was a bit of a surprise because I didn't know what it was for. And I think Jeffrey Thomas, who was the journalist interviewing me on the stage, I think he figured it out before I did and asked me that question. You'd think it was because of your support for marriage equality. And it was a very angry, forceful, pie to the face. It was very much a message of that I want you to stop talking about it. You're a powerful gay man and I'm threatened by your commentary and your insistence on it. My reaction to that, like all bullies, is that you stand up to it.
Coming up, how Qantas eked out cost savings. And we take a look at the ultra long haul program, starting in the cockpit.
Captain Slate.
How do you do?
With Qantas back on a firmer financial footing, Joyce is looking to the future, and that's ultra long haul. By 2022, the airline plans groundbreaking flights from Sydney and Melbourne to London and New York. The routes are only possible because of a wave of innovation in aircraft design.
This technology changes the game. The Perth-London service that we've now operated for a year has been the best new service in our 99-year history, the best customer ratings, the best financial performance. We haven't made money on the London market for 10 years since the global financial crisis. It made money from day one. We're getting 94% C factors. We're getting a premium, people willing to pay more to fly direct. And we know if it works on Perth, it will work on Melbourne and Sydney to London, and Melbourne and Sydney to New York, to Chicago, to Rio, to Cape Town.
Captain Slate.
How do you do?
David Tweed from Bloomberg.
Hi,
Thank
David.
you for having
Really
us.
nice to meet you.
Pleasure.
Take a seat.
To make the turnaround work, Joyce had to have the buy-in from all parts of the organisation. Pilots now have to think about more than just flying planes.
Flight management was like a really key part of the turnaround. Tell us exactly how that affected the flight management and actually the pilots.
With regards to aircraft utilisation, so we have some of the highest utilisation of any airlines in the world at the moment. The A330 that we're sitting on at the moment, they utilise up to 18 hours a day. So our networks team have finely tuned our programs so that the aircraft are flying, and it's a fine balance between having them on the ground for the required maintenance and utilising them and increasing our revenue. We also did a big piece of work on our 35-minute turnaround. So to reduce the turnaround of our domestic aircraft, we introduced dual door boarding and disembarkation. And we had a whole team of frontline people involved in the workshopping around how we could do it. So obviously the juggling of cleaning staff, catering, engineering, etc. So we've got a very precise precision timing schedule to ensure that happens within 35 minutes.
I find it really interesting that you as a pilot are talking about revenue and revenue targets. Is that something new since you've been, 30 years, I believe, as a pilot with Qantas?
Historically, we'd only look at flying the aircraft, but now we know we're in really challenging environments. So fuel efficiency, so we've introduced a whole lot of fuel efficiency measures with regards to running our auxiliary power units on the ground. We've implemented single engine taxiing to save a few kilos here and there, but across the year, across the fleet, it all adds up. So fuel saving is very much front of mind.
So this is our central operations area for Qantas.
Qantas's ultra-long haul program means that optimising routes is essential. Captain Alan Dickinson is the guy in charge of developing the new flight planning system.
We had a flight from Sydney to Santiago, which was probably a really good example in that we could see just by dipping down a little further south than normal, it was able to pick up a jet stream. And then by just dipping down a little bit further south and then coming north a little bit sooner than the old system was planning, we were able to save a tonne of fuel on that flight.
But when you look at this system compared with the old Capricorn system, what sort of percentage savings are we looking at?
So we will target, we're hoping to achieve around the 1% saving, fuel saving. We are still, this is a very new system, we're still in the process of introducing the new system, but we have high levels of confidence that over the short term we will be able to achieve around about a 1% saving on it.
Well, I mean, given the fuel prices, 1% is a lot of money.
And every cent counts, as we say. Every kilo counts.
While looking for savings, safety remains a priority. This is the hangar in Sydney where the enormous A380 comes for servicing. It's so tall, they had to raise the roof. It's so wide, they had to widen the space. Jackie Scott has been a Qantas engineer for 10 years. Safety before schedule, that's the Qantas motto.
Well, Airbus actually dictates when most of our components are changed. So they may decide that a particular part needs changing at 1,000 hours. Qantas will say 750 hours. So we have a quarter of that time spare, so if any unforeseen circumstances we have a little bit extra time, as well as we just want to be as safe as possible, not leave things to the last minute.
If Joyce is going to make his ultra-long haul program work, he's going to have to make sure his passengers want to take the flights. And one way to entice them is the food.
This is our little test kitchen.
Right.
We do a few events from here, but mainly we do all the testing for the menu twice a year.
Qantas has got top chef Neil Perry working with scientists on menus to enhance sleep and hydration for ultra-long haul flights.
And here we have Danae, who looks after
Hello.
our cocktails, which have alcohol in them, of course, but also our mocktails, which is knocking up for us now, because the whole rehydration of our passengers is a major focus for us.
Especially on these ultra-long haul flights.
Especially on the long haul flights, thank you. And, it really is all about not tricking people, but getting them to drink as much delicious rehydration as they can through. We do great infused teas, we do coconut water.
Perry and his chefs are constantly working on creating food that is still delicious at high altitudes.
We look at that in relation to the long haul. We try to dial the spices and the chili down a little bit. Stimulating spices are not great when you're trying to relax. So the whole idea is that we get proteins, starches, beautiful leafy green vegetables, legumes, those sorts of things help really stimulate sleep.
As Qantas gears up toward beginning the longest flights in its history, Joyce needs to remain vigilant about the risks that could once again buffet the airline.
Qantas is not invincible. I think what we saw in 2012 to 2014 really shows that. It was a near-death experience. And what Qantas faced at that point was a war on two fronts. It can lose money internationally as long as it's making a lot of money domestically. But if both divisions are facing pressure and losing money, then it's a really difficult situation for Qantas, and it can happen again.
Joyce has pledged to stay on as CEO until 2022, when the direct flights to London and New York begin. The potential risks to the airline will remain at the forefront of his mind.
We've been around for 99 years. We're the oldest continuous operating airline in the world, and we've always reinvented ourselves or disrupted ourselves before somebody else has. And I think we're always on edge. We're always thinking, where could the next disruption come from? What do we need to do to stay ahead of that game? And we're very much always concentrating on that.